Okay, good morning. This is Richard Hsu, host of Hsu Untied. This morning, I'm very thrilled to have with me as my guest Tom Kearney, who's of counsel at Winston and Strawn. Tom, welcome to the program.
Thanks for having me, Richard.
Now, Tom, I've interviewed, I think literally over 100 something lawyers now, but you have one of the most interesting backgrounds I have come across, so I'm very excited to have this conversation with you.
All right.
So let me start by asking you, with your most unusual undergraduate degree, mathematics and linguistics. Tell me a little bit about what made you decide to go into that esoteric field.
That odd combination.
Yeah.
I'll start with college. Coming out of high school, I was very interested in math. I had taken, all the math and then a little bit more at my local college. And so when I started school, I knew that I wanted to major in math. I got to Stanford and discovered that the math department, at least as far as the stuff that I had already been doing, was largely a service department for the engineers. And so I shifted focus and I started doing sort of more foundational mathematics. So less calculus, less analysis, and more set theory, formal languages, and that sort of thing. Not to get too technical, but I got very interested in logic and the foundations of math over the next couple of years. And just by happenstance, I was looking through the course catalog back in the day when the course catalog was a thing you could leaf through, found that Stanford had a linguistics department, which intrigued me. So I went and talked to their undergraduate advisor for what turned out to be several hours, went down to the admin office and changed my major. I added a linguistics major.
What does one study as a linguistics majors? When I think of linguistics, I think of studying foreign languages, but I'm guessing it's not just studying foreign languages.
It can be. There's a couple of different divisions of linguistics. There's sociolinguistics, where you study the sociology of, the social and cultural characteristics of language. There's historical linguistics, you study the developments of languages. And then there's formal linguistics, which is sort of a mathematical, theoretical structure of, how human language works on a structural mathematical level. And as it turned out, luckily for me, at the time, Stanford was sort of a hotbed of formal linguistics. So with my math background, it was a great fit. I could sort of slip right in, and they were doing this was in the wake of Noam Chomsky's structural linguistics and syntax work. So the math was a great fit, as it turned out. And so I sort of, there was a lot of synergy. I talked the departments into believing that there was a lot of synergy, so I could get my distribution requirements met by taking classes sort of, interdepartmentally.
Now, this is a question you probably don't get that much, but since I went to Caltech, I'm going to ask you anyways. What was the thorniest math class that you took?
The thorniest math class. So the class that drove me out of the analysis area was complex analysis. I was in there with I don't know what your engineering background is, but I was in the class with a bunch of electrical engineers.
Yes.
And I didn't get it. So so shortly thereafter, I started taking some logic classes. I think the thorniest class was an advanced logic class where the end goal of the class was to go through Gödel's incompleteness theorem, which for your listeners is it's the foundational and most annoying result of the 20th century in logic, which basically says that any sufficiently complicated system of math will never be complete, cannot be complete. There are true things you can say that you can't prove. And even if you add the new true things, there'll still be new truth. it's just a horrible thorn in the side of mathematics. So I took the class. We went through the proof. I did every step, and it was like climbing a mountain in fog. Every step that I took, I understood, and I understood the next step. But when I got to the peak, and we had demonstrated the incompleteness theorem, and I looked back, I could not have found my way back down that mountain. I didn't remember the last thing I did.
Do you remember using a book called Div, Grad, and Curl? Do you remember that book?
I do not.
Okay.
That sounds like an engineering analysis.
Yeah, I guess it's more of an engineering math book than yeah, obviously I took a lot of math, but and it's all very vague. But I do remember Green's theorem and but I remember getting quite lost like in abstract algebra, and I never took combinatorics, although that was a class that I was kind of interested in.
Yeah. So it sounds like we kind of took the two different forks of
that's what it sounds
math.
like.
What was your engineering degree in?
I was basically an electrical engineer, although I didn't quite completely finish the degree, but most of my classes were in that area. So I did take some applied math and so forth. So yeah.
Cool.
It was enough for me.
Well, it broke me of my initial thoughts that I would become a mathematics professor somewhere.
Yeah, I was just going to ask you about that. Interesting. So so how does one go from being a math and linguistics major to becoming interested in film? That also seems like the most disparate, way to go from there.
Yeah, well, so it's funny because when I I'm sure we'll get to this. When I went to law school and came out and was interviewing with people, I had a very logical explanation of why my career path made perfect sense. I honestly can't remember right now what my rationale was, but to be honest, and looking back at it, I was really interested in I started off interested in screenwriting.
Okay.
And I think because as an avid reader, I loved fiction.
Okay.
But I also liked the technical rules-based, the sort of scaffolding that you had with a screenplay to then create this, complex, interlocking, elaborate type of story that was filmed. I just found the screenplay to be fascinating for some reason.
Huh.
So
and you were just reading screenplays? I mean, screenplays aren't something most people read. I mean, it's not like how did you come across reading screenplays to begin with?
Yeah, so again, luck of the draw. Special collections at the library had a collection of screenplays.
Huh.
There was a documentary, like a graduate documentary program. They had some screenwriting programs, and I if I recall correctly, I talked my way into auditing a screenwriting class. It was sort of from a theoretical documentary based perspective at Stanford at the time. But they had a bunch of screenplays, good screenplays, not so good screenplays. And at the time, it was unusual to have them outside of, I guess, an agent's or a producer's office.
Yeah, right.
But they had a bunch. So I could look at them and sort of get the feel of them. It's like it's a very highly structured type of writing.
Yeah, for sure.
Very formalized, and with they had Hollywood scripts, so the structure was pretty Hollywoody.
Yeah.
I was able to read that and sort of absorb that genre.
So you like screenwriting, you thought it was good, but then what made you decide to pursue it did you try writing some screenplays?
I did, yeah. I wrote some horrible screenplays. I wrote some very bad spec TV scripts.
Okay.
This was over the next couple years. So when I got out got my undergraduate degree, it was go on to get a graduate degree,
right,
or go to work for, Hewlett Packard or somebody in Silicon Valley, which was sort of just ramping up at the time.
Yeah.
And I didn't want to do either one of those things. I had some interviews. I talked at Hewlett Packard, and so I made the brilliant career decision to move down to Los Angeles and try to break into the film industry
Huh.
and teach myself to write screenplays.
Okay.
Which it was slow going. It was self-taught, and with all the good and the bad and the slow that implies.
Yeah.
So, I did temp work. I ended up doing some legal secretarial work as a temp because it paid pretty well. And then eventually, I got an agent. I didn't get anything on my agent, as one doesn't. And then decided that a better plan would be to try to break into film from the inside. So I applied to film schools and ended up going to USC Film School.
So then what happened after that?
So I started literally the semester before USC started its screenwriting program.
Okay.
So I was admitted to the film production program.
Okay.
And I decided, well, I believe, if I recall correctly, I think I talked to somebody about transferring into the screenwriting program, but of course I hadn't applied to the screenwriting program. And of course it was very competitive to get in. So I stayed in the film production program. Very glad that I did. And so I spent the next couple of years, learning the crafts and the trades of film. They made you do, the first day they said, okay, go out and buy a Super 8 camera, come back in a week with a film. So as sort of into the hurly-burly right away. A lot of trial by fire, and it was a pretty comprehensive technical education, and I think it gave me a lot of insight into the why the stories were told the way they were, and how you actually told them on a technical level. I had a technical background, so I sort of gravitated towards film sound. They make you specialize. Everybody works on everybody else's student films. You act, you produce, you hold microphones, you do all kinds of stuff. And so by the end of film school, I was pretty expert in production sound, recording production sound, and editing sound for film, video, and television. So that kind of launched that. That was the focus of my film career, was sound editing. I kept screenwriting, but except for very few people, still to this day and always, screenplays just don't get bought.
Yeah, right. So did you end up making a quote career out of being a sound editor? Is that what you kind of basically did after that as a career?
I did some production sound, but as one of my mentors said, what you really want is loud actors in a comfortable chair. And the best place to get that is in a studio editing stuff that somebody else has recorded. So I ended up as a dialogue editor. So there's, again, everything is specialized down to the as low as you can get. And so I ended up being primarily a dialogue editor. I would take recorded sound on location and fix it so that you didn't hear the cup being slammed down in the middle of somebody's line. You didn't hear the car starting. You didn't hear the airplane going over in a period Western. You didn't hear the actor with cotton mouth smacking his lips on every line. A lot of cleanup, a lot of very finicky matching, which I enjoyed. I mean, I kind of enjoyed that detail work.
But I'm going to guess, since you ended up becoming a lawyer, that you decided that was not ultimately that was not going to be for you, or you decided to give up on that industry, or?
So yeah, eventually I worked. Let's see, I graduated from film school, I think in 93, 94. It's always a little fuzzy. And by 10 or 12 years, I felt like I had got what I'd come for.
Yeah.
I had done a little of everything. I had done a lot of one thing. I felt like I had really I had mastered the sound editing, and I could become a supervising sound editor. But I was kind of done with that. Um, Spent a long time in Los Angeles, and it really never felt like home.
Huh. Interesting.
I met my wife in film. She's a documentary filmmaker.
Hmm.
We had 2 kids, and um, I would just say that everyone in Hollywood is working hand to mouth. Some people have really big hands, right? But everybody's going from project to project.
Yeah.
Um, and that gets old, especially when you're. So I was what they say below the line. I was way below the line, and so when a production delay would happen, a show would get canceled or a show would get delayed or moved. I would end up out of work for a week or 2 weeks or a month before it would start up again or a new show would come on. That gets really old when you have kids.
Yeah, I can imagine.
And we had both my wife and I kind of wanted to leave Los Angeles. So, confluence of circumstances and some friends who had a similar career trajectory, law school started to look like a really interesting option.
So, and I take it that was something that you never thought about earlier in your career, or was not on your radar earlier in your career.
No, in fact, I would say I used to joke, but I think it's true. Over a period of about a month or two, sometime around 2005, I went from just not, the lawyer was nowhere on my map. If you had asked me if I wanted to be a lawyer, I would have laughed in your face. Mm-hmm. And maybe a month or 6 weeks later, I would have said, of course, that's the only rational thing to do. I mean, that sounds great. That's me up.
So how have you enjoyed being a lawyer? I mean, now that you went and did it, I mean, is it been a good career choice?
Yeah, absolutely. Like I said, I felt like I'd got what I'd come for in Hollywood. My wife and I both did. Mm-hmm. We didn't like Los Angeles particularly. We didn't like Hollywood particularly. It's there's a lot of energy. There's a lot of creativity. There's a lot of superficiality. There's a lot of success or nothing. Mm-hmm. It was not the lifestyle or the sort of life out, the outlook that we wanted to be stewing in. Mm-hmm. So I for copying and internet reasons become very interested in copyright law.
Yeah, right.
And so I was looking for a school that had a good intellectual property program. Ended up at Berkeley. And my wife has family in the Bay Area. I really missed the Bay Area. We both like it here. So, it was a lot of factors came together. Moved up. And I will say, by and large, the lawyers that I meet are much nicer than the film people, on the average. Lawyers are nicer than film people. You can quote me on that. On the average.
Interesting. So now, do you think you should have? I mean, now that you look back in your interesting career, do you think you should have gone to law school earlier? Do you regret doing the film thing, or do you think that that's still it was still important for you to do it at the time?
I think I don't regret the career path. I think if I had, well, I wouldn't have gone to law school earlier. So whether that was because it was not mentally prepared, I just wasn't interested in that aspect. Yeah. And I'm really glad that I followed followed that interest. I think I learned a lot, and actually I think it informs my legal practice to have that sort of sense of narrative. A lot, almost everything of what lawyers do is narrative, right? It's persuasive, it's time bound, you're following something from the beginning with a goal in mind.
Yeah.
And so having that, I sort of think of law as it's another genre, or another, area of storytelling performance. I think I read you have an acting background.
I don't have an acting background. I dabbled and tried doing some acting as a sort of an experiment. So I took a class that was in the Sandy Meisner era,
Oh yeah,
Sandy Meisner training. So I did that for a few months. Quickly realized that was definitely not for me, but it was something fun to dabble with. Yeah, that was something.
Did you find that had interesting reverberations or reflections in your legal practice?
Not really, actually. I thought it was going to be much more interesting and challenging, and I really found it wasn't. But the thing that really just kind of I just could not do was the line memorization, which I realize is not what actors say that's not a big challenge. But for me, that just became such a hurdle for me. I just could not memorize lines. And so, I mean, if you can't do that, there's really a limit on what you can do. But you can have all the passion and the acting and talent, but if you can't memorize lines, it's pretty difficult. I just couldn't. That's kind of basically where it stopped for me.
You could always go on Saturday Night Live, right? I mean, my wife had a story when she made a documentary that got a lot of attention and was shopping around a feature film version of it, as one does. And she had a story where her dad, she was talking to her dad, and he said, well, why don't you just call up Disney? Call Michael Eisner. And she had to explain to him that that's really not the way anything works, but certainly not the way Hollywood works.
Well, do you still dabble in some stuff now? Do you make any, do you still write screenplays just for fun or anything? Do you do anything with that side of your...
I don't write screenplays for fun. It takes too much.
It takes yeah.
It's, even a short screenplay, like, for a film short, takes a lot out of you, but a feature screenplay, so I wrote a couple. I wrote one. So at one point I got invited to the Sundance producers conference on the strength of a screenplay that I wrote. So plug for me, never got produced, so unplug for me. But that probably took me a good 9 or 12, probably a good 9 months of really intensive work to finish. It's not hobby writing. For hobby writing, like you might write a blog or poetry or something that you can finish in a shorter amount of time. My wife and I, we continue this tradition where no one will ever watch a movie with us, because we analyze it constantly as it's going by. So there's that.
What about your math? Do you ever get to use that at all? Do you solve any interesting problems on the side just for fun?
I do not. Let's see. I mean, I do the occasional puzzle, but not at a very high level. My son's in just about to graduate in computer science. He got very mathy. He's still very mathy. And I remember the point at which my declining arc and his upward trajectory crossed. It was in high school. So, math is kind of it's not necessarily, strictly use it or lose it, but after 20 years or so, you forget the details.
Well, Tom, this has been a wonderful conversation. I really loved hearing about your interesting background, and it was just really great to talk to you.
Great. Nice talking to you too, Richard.
This is Richard Hsu and Tom Kearney. Thanks.